Our next speaker is an EGSA member, Jim McDonald. He is Director of Environmental Impact for PowerSecure and has been in our industry for more than 25 years. Jim is an expert on environmental controls for power generation equipment. He's also a co-founder of Miratech Corp. And has a patent pending from his work with the Right Post Corporation and regularly testifies in front of the EPA and several state rulemaking committees. He has also been a Raleigh School of Instructor since 2008 and is consistently given higher than average evaluation scores by those attending the school. Jim authored the Engine Emissions chapter for the EGSA reference book, a comprehensive guide to on-site power. He is an active conference attendee and even chaired the Green Committee from 2012 to 2014. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to give a warm welcome to one of our tireless volunteers, a good friend of mine as well, Jim McDonald of PowerSecure.
I don't know. So, a little bit of background here. This is a 45-minute presentation, and I have 15 minutes to do it. So rather than blow your ears off, okay. I'm going to hit the high points. I don't want to keep you from your salads, but any other big 80s fans out there? This morning, oh my, I was just floored. It was the highlight of my life to meet Cliff. That was fantastic. So you probably know this band. Sorry if I'm being too loud. This is the overwhelming theme of emissions presentations for the last 15 years is we're going to scare the heck out of you with Tier 4. I usually ask people to lock the doors because an emissions conversation is better attended if you limit the escape routes. But Tier 4 came and it didn't go. It came and stayed, and it really wasn't as scary as we thought it was going to be. And the proposition that I wanted to kind of throw out to the crowd is let's embrace it, because I really believe that there's some virtue in it, and if we're not afraid of it, it could very well save our industry. So I won't go too fast, but I'm going to give some definitions, tell some stories. The stories is what I'm going to cut short, show some maps, and as I said, save our industry. The objective here today is the organizers of this event, and you don't have to read this, the organizers of this event asked it to be informative, non-commercial, somewhat entertaining, but they didn't say, whoa. They didn't say it couldn't be personal, so I have a couple of things in here that actually have to do with me. I've given this presentation in some sort of form 100 times, and the only thing that could potentially go wrong is if it turns into a political discussion. So as far as the practice of tree hugging, I am agnostic. I want you at the end of this thing to say the guy was pretty informative, but I have no idea how he voted. So if you are a Trump guy and you think he's going to do away with the EPA and build a wall to keep the polar bears up north, great. If you're a Hillary fan and she was going to put a seal in the cabinet, fantastic. I'm going to hit the middle of the road, and we're not going to let it get off the tracks. So my title, as Hal mentioned, is Director of Environmental Impact, and thanks for not choking on that expert part. That was great. The first call I took after that came up on LinkedIn was from Michael Pope, and he said, "What the heck is that?" Of course, it sounded a lot more distinguished because he's got that overindulgent English accent. But what it is, when you want to look at environmental impact, the EPA has a definition of environmental impact. It's whenever they write a law, they want to see what positive and negative effects that law is going to create, and how widespread the ramifications are. But you can look at environmental impact in a million different ways. You can look at it as a rule for the EPA. You can look at it as an industry, a group like ours. What is our environmental impact? What is our goal? You can do it for individuals and organizations. So this this part of the presentation I'll kind of whip through because we're in the matter of time. But has anyone here read any books on Rudolph Diesel? It's kind of sad that we don't know the founder of this industry, and he was a tremendous man. He had a lot of altruistic intents, and he did some incredible things. But you can't really tell a compelling story without first seeing a face. That's our hero at 9 years old. He was born in France in 1858. He lived there till he was 12 years old. He was a genius. He was a very, very smart kid. He got himself into some trouble. It was John Ratzenberger would have loved young Rudolph. He once took apart a cuckoo clock and cut it back together. Got in big trouble for that. He once messed with the stove and almost blew up his apartment. But he was actually a very, very smart man. He spoke 3 languages, or as a kid, he spoke 3 languages taught by his mother. And he used to wander the museums of Paris, and one of the things he saw while he was there was the Cugnot steam engine. Nicholas Cugnot had invented this steam tractor 100 years prior, and Diesel was fascinated with it. He drew a lot of pictures of it and that they found later in his life. And it was just something that really made an impression on him. When he was about 12, the Franco-Prussian War broke out. Napoleon III was leading Germany at the time. He wasn't a real effective leader. He actually backed the South in our Civil War, but I'm not going to go into politics. So what Rudolph did with his family is because the war broke out, they had to go to London. So he was in London for about 12 weeks when he wandered the museums there. But one of the things he saw was the sweatshops of the day, the mills and everything in London. And he was really affected by it. It made an impression for the rest of his life. He was going to fight for the working man. And it was one of the virtues that we wanted to talk about, is it made such an impression on him. So he went to London. He only was there again for several months. And then he went to Germany to live with his uncle and go to the schools in Munich. It was a much better plan for him. His parents were struggling financially, so he went there. One of the things that's funny so he goes to Munich. Again, I'll keep this short. He goes to Munich. He graduated top of his class from his high school. He had the best grades ever recorded at the school. He was the youngest person to ever graduate from the school. So at 19, he becomes a German citizen. He's quite proud of that. But what goes along with becoming a German citizen is you are immediately enrolled in the army. He couldn't actually serve in the army because, believe it or not, he had asthma. But we'll get back to that. This is the meat of what I wanted to talk about. Let's talk about pollution versus emissions. It's important to talk about the near-term effects and the direct health impacts, and then the indirect health impacts. Again, this is where politically we can go off the rails. So there is pollution, which is a subset of emissions. And there are politicians that get this wrong, environmentalists who get this wrong, and even in our industry we get into these discussions about emissions, and it's very, very important that we separate the two. The emissions is anything that comes out of the tailpipe, so it's water vapor, it is nitrogen, it is CO2 obviously, and pollution is a very, very small part of it. It's actually less than 1% of it. So when you see a politician who says CO2 pollution, you should cringe, because the fact that I would be the biggest polluter in the room right now, and the folks wearing the masks in the airport would actually be doing themselves harm if that was true. So it's important to separate out what is pollution and what is emissions. So I'm so used to being Han Solo with the laser pointer. The pollution would be NOx, CO, particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, and mercury. Those are the names of pollutants. Tomorrow, the things that could be indirect risk to human life are CO2, methane, water vapor, and nitrogen. It's just an important distinction. When you hear somebody talking about pollution and they lumping the two of them together, it's a dangerous place to go. There's no date in the history of the world that showed this irony more than December 8th, 2015. So on the left is Shanghai and Beijing. It was their first apocalypse, an ozone alert day in the red category. Does anyone remember this? It was so bad that they could not land a third of the planes at the airport that day. Now, what you see, that cloud on the left, it has nothing to do with CO2. It really is not global warming pollution. That
And on the right is Xi Jinping sitting next to President Obama at the Paris Climate Accords. So he left town. He's at the Paris Climate Accords negotiating global warming treaties when this is the issue he has back at home. It's really a priority thing. Is yes, in the long run, if he gets rid of his coal power plants 50 years from now, will it help with the pollution? Sure. But he's got an issue today that he's kind of ignoring on some level. So back to Germany. Germany has always been at the forefront of environmental regulations. They the first ones to come out with very strict laws, TA Luft. Does anyone remember TA Luft? But they were also the first one to jump on the bandwagon for greenhouse gases and things like that. Before Volkswagen and the Fahrvergnügen that took place there, Germany was really always at the forefront. So what they did was they came out with something called a percentage by date goal. I'm sorry, it's German. So they came out with something called 80 by 50. 80 by 50, whenever you hear an expression 80 by 50 or something like that, they're talking about a percentage in greenhouse gas reduction by a certain year. So they were the first ones to come out with one of these goals. They have an 80 by 50. They came out in 2010. It's well on their way. They hit 27% in 2014. They plan on phasing out their nukes by 2022. But here are the issues that they're running into. And the reason why I even bring it up is because we're barreling towards the same path, and it's very, very good to learn from their mistakes. So the price in 2000 for power, although we would consider this high, was 18 cents. It's now 37 cents and going up. The surcharge, which is like a demand charge, it was 18% in 2014. They're getting traditional power plants to close because they can't economically compete with all the wind and the solar that are coming onto the grid. But they need backup. Obviously, wind and solar is intermittent, so what are they doing? They're keeping their coal plants around, and the net result is a much less stable grid. When you put wind and solar on your grid, what you're going to do is you're going to have to balance it out. And balancing it out would be when the wind stops blowing or the sun starts shining, you've got to pick it up very, very, very quickly. So the balancing market is a huge market over there. The price, people are paying $16 a kW for resources that can get on and off the grid quickly. So 15 minutes, 5 minutes, or 30 seconds. Does anybody think of something that can potentially create power or come off the grid in that shorter time frame? We'll get to that. Anyway, so right now what they're doing is they're taking lignite coal plants and they're retrofitting them for fast ramp up and ramp down. It's incredibly disruptive to the grid. They have all this wind and the solar and they put it on, and what they call it is interventions. When the governing power authority has to call on these folks to prop up the grid for whatever reason, it's called an intervention. In 2010, the number of interventions was 209. In 2013, it was over 1,000. So that's kind of what is shown here. Is the grid operator there can't sleep at night because they're constantly trying to plug the holes and pick up for the slack that's going on. So, and this is a graph just showing the coal is returning. That's what I was talking about, is if all these other assets can't compete economically, you're going to have to make up for the power somehow, and you're going to do it with coal. So coal is actually going up. So what is the net effect? The net effect is that the CO2 increase in the last few years in Germany. And this was exactly what they were actually trying to get away from. This whole venture was to lower the greenhouse gas emissions, and the greenhouse gas emissions are going up because of the coal plants that are staying on the grid. Anyway, in New York City, I live right outside New York City. I'm there all the time. They sent a whole contingent over to Germany last year to see if this problem still exists. So you can probably tell that some of that data is fairly old. They came back and said, yeah, the utility said everything is fine. We figured it all out. But actually, that's not true. The New York Times just wrote an article this summer that they put an end to a number of the subsidies, and they are going to probably not do the nuke phase out like they had talked about, and they're going to reintroduce coal to some extent. This is the most up-to-date portfolio that you can see. All of the gray is coal or gas. It's all fossil fuels. The yellow is nuke. I know it's hard to see this in the back. And the green is renewables. So that's where they are today. They're not going to hit their 20 by 50 goal. Anyway, there's a lot of jobs at stake. There's about 10,000 jobs at stake in Germany just on the coal side of things. those those are coal miners. They're the cleanest coal miners I've ever seen. The reaction, as you would expect, is furious. Everyone is very mad at Germany for pulling back on these goals. That sign says, coal, no thank you. Anyway, so why am I bringing this up? That's Germany's problem, but if we hop across the pond, we can certainly learn from their mistakes. And what's happening here, if you don't already know it, is that there's renewable portfolio standards that are coming around stateside. So because of the election, and we're not going to get into it, the states have taken it upon themselves to come up with their own renewable goals, and about 48 of them out of the 55 U.S. states and territories have come up with their own. That's very, very hard to see, but it's all versions of the same thing, a date and a percentage reduction. New York is 80 by 50. Marty thought it was very funny that South Carolina is 2%. They want a 2% reduction in their greenhouse gases. You can achieve that by turning the lights off when you leave. Anyway, so the ISOs, so what's an ISO? An ISO is an independent system operator. An ISO is, think of it as the air traffic controller for the grid. They take a look at all the generation, all the load, and they're always comparing. Now, it's broken up into sections here in the US, but they do intermingle. I mean, for those of you who remember the 2003 blackout, that started in Ohio with First Energy, but it made it all the way over to us in New York. But their job is to manage supply and demand. It's an ongoing, real-time problem. So you've heard 1,000 of these stories, and some of them that I'll keep short. In Colorado, there's about 100 megawatts in this one little county of solar. On this date back in 2008, in 5 minutes, they had an 81% drop. A giant black cloud rolled in, and they had an 81% drop in generation in 5 minutes. I mean, that's ludicrous. How do you respond to something like that? My favorite is, so that was the too little. My favorite is the too much story. So this is the Columbia River Gorge. We talked about the Cascades. They have 1,000 windmills in this part of the country. This is Oregon. So they had 1,000 windmills, and they were just kind of easily swinging along like you normally see. And then a storm came out of the east on May 19th, and they started spinning around like crazy. And within an hour, 2 nuke plants worth of electricity was flooding the lines. So, you're the independent system operator, you're Bonneville Power Authority up there, and you've got to react to this. Well, there's also an issue with the fact that it's May. So May in Oregon, it's been raining since November. So the Cascades, all of the melting snow and everything has filled up all the hydroelectric lakes. So they're jammed. They basically have to be letting water out through the turbines, and they're at full power output. So this is basically on the same day. Although the wind just tried to flood the lines that are already jammed with all of the hydro. So what do? So a hydro guy has 2 choices. You let it flow over the dam normally and generate the power, or you send it down this side river, if you will, an overflow. Well, in May, you can't do that. It's actually illegal to send it down the thing on the right because of all of the oceanic salmon fingerlings that are spawning at the time, and you would wipe them out. So it's illegal to dump the water. So your Bonneville Power Authority, your grid is jammed. What do? So they called the wind developer and said, pull the plug. It's a company called Iberdrola. They're out of Spain. But Iberdrola, what do they care for the grid? They're being paid to make the power, So they're like, we're not pulling the plug. Not only are we going to make less money, but the federal government gave us all these subsidies, and if we ever pull the plug, we got to give the money back. So this is the grid. This is today's grid when you're trying to get renewables. And I'm not on any level. On this side of the audience, I'm probably on the greener side. I give this presentation all the time to renewable forums, and I talk about extolling the virtues of diesel, and they want to tar and feather me and throw me out. I mean, if you mention the D word at a solar and a wind forum, you're wearing a black hat. It's a diesel soot-colored black hat. But I'm just trying to talk about how do we get these wind and solar, what resources can we provide this grid to help them? Where's Steve? Is Steve here? Steve's the man. All right, so a couple years ago, Steve wrote a 3-part series in Powerline about renewables. Are they an opportunity or a threat? And it was amazing. I'm sure people who read it will back me up. It was so well done. Steve's a straight shooter, and he authors stuff the same way. If you write down anything from me rambling on here this morning, get a copy of this article, because it's incredibly well done, and there's no way I could do it any justice, so I'm not presenting on it. I actually, in particular, tried not to read it again because I was afraid I was going to plagiarize. But get a copy of it, it's fantastic. So my big premise is, what if there was a distributed generator that we could use to help the grid handle all of these intermittent resources, and put that generation on site so you get rid of the line losses? It could turn on and off, maybe let's say in 10 seconds. The requirement is 30. Let's say we could give them a generation tech that comes on in 10 seconds. It's reliable, it's more proven reliable and efficient than anything else out there. It's 70% cleaner, tier 4-ish, and it has a proven extended lifespan. So let's say we do hit our 80 by 50. Let's give them something today that could last 30 years, and it's now in the infrastructure, and we could use it for other things moving forward. And the point of this is, let's get rid of the unwarranted stigma of diesel, and we can do that by embracing pollution controls. I call it tier 4, but any group that sells pollution controls that you can put on a diesel, you can get diesels incredibly clean. This is my only commercial slide as a plug, and it's exactly what I'm talking about. Arizona Public Service built a plant in Yuma, Arizona that's 25 megawatts. It's a backup to a marine base, but what they use it for is balancing the grid. There's so much solar in Arizona that they called on this thing 70 times last year to prop up the grid. And it's all tier 4 diesel. It's the perfect solution for the issues that they're having. How are we doing on time? Let me just touch on a couple other things. So this is my big mantra, is we need to be, as an industry, the clean diesel has to be the bridge to a renewable horizon. If we stand up and we jump up and down and we say no renewables, we're defeating the purpose. We can be that bridge for the next 20 to 30 years if we embrace the pollution control equipment, put it on the proven diesel engine, and we can get there and provide a tremendous service for our grid. This is more stories about Diesel. He was a pretty amazing guy. His first patent actually was for manufactured ice. When he went to Germany, he ended up tutoring under Carl Lind, who was the father of ammonia refrigeration. And so at 23, he came out with a patent, and he's my hero because he took this patented ice machine. Back in the day, they used to take huge blocks of ice from the winter and chip away at it all summer long. He manufactured ice, and then he went straight to the breweries and figured out how to keep your beer cold. So for those toasting this evening, raise one to Rudolph. That's the family that he had. This is probably the only time he ever saw them because he was working so hard on developing the diesel engine. You can't read all of these things, but he basically hit every roadblock you can imagine when you're developing some new piece of equipment. Metallurgy, starting, piston rings, crankshaft. The number of patents that he has in different countries and the number of obstacles he overcame was extraordinary. I'll just hit on his virtues real quick. If you read any of the books about Diesel, and I've read them all, his big thing was relief on the working class. He believed that an effective power-making machine, and that's what he called it, an effective power-making machine, could help the working class, and all those memories he has of the sweatshops back in London. He had a tremendous focus on safety. In the 5 years of heavy development of the diesel engine, he didn't have one accident. So if he had one of those signs, it would say 1,800 days since the last accident. Greater efficiency. Remember, he replaced a steam engine that was 10% efficient. So his first engines were in the neighborhood of 30%. Now a diesel engine could be 45, 50, depending on what you're doing, and a spark engine is 30. So as far as efficiency, he did the whole industry a tremendous favor. His first big expo in Paris in 1900, he demonstrated his engine running on peanut oil. If you read any of his notes, that was the long-term goal he had, was to do biodiesel on just about everything. In fact, the National Biodiesel Day is his birthday on March 18th. Anyway, and much less pollution. He was always very, very proud of the fact that compared to a steam engine, this thing was clean. He was at an expo in Paris in 1898. He actually had his family, he took his family outside the exhibit hall to stand outside and watch him fire up the thing because he was so proud of how little smoke was coming out of it. I'm probably gonna say, where are we on time? 5 minutes? Okay. These are stories about pollution and the effects of pollution. One thing I wanted to talk about, so Tier 4, I'm just going to talk about Tier 4, but you can get there with a million different ways. When you're talking about a data center, a Tier 4 data, a lot of data centers, obviously big customers of ours, you can put in 150 megawatts at a data center with Tier 4 without even tripping 5 tons. And 5 tons is usually what the air boards call a de minimis threshold. They don't even care about you until you hit 5 tons. With Tier 4, because of how clean it is, you can put in 150 megawatts. And then the other thing we talk about is hours to equal. If you have a 72-hour Tier 2, let's say you put an emergency generator at 72 and it runs 72 hours a year, the amount of NOx that comes out of that generator is equal to 1,600 hours on a Tier 4. That's how clean it is. I know you've seen the charts before. Versus natural gas, and we provide natural gas. I am not bad-mouthing natural gas on any level. If you compare 8 pollutants, though, of a natural gas engine out of the box, an NSPS conforming natural gas, the diesel, Tier 4 diesel, is cleaner on 7 of 8 of them, including NOx, CO, hydrocarbons, formaldehyde. The only one it's not cleaner than a natural gas on is particulate matter. And that's some charts showing that. This was in the New York Times, which actually probably killed them to put it in there. But on the far right is the diesel oil greenhouse gas emissions compared to natural gas engines and coal-fired power plants. And I think a copy of this presentation will go out there. But basically, when you take into account the life cycle of pulling the gas out of the ground, transporting the gas, methane emissions that come out of valves, leaking valves and things like that, the diesel is the best thing out there. Nobody wants to talk about this, but I'll give you the data if you're talking about it. Real quick again. My final thought. The coal business, I am not anti-coal on any level. They had a meeting very similar to this about 5 years ago. And if a face tells 1,000 stories, you can't see some of those. So these people were absolutely miserable. And the reason for that, I think that's Steve Evans. Is that Steve? Anyway, the reason for this was they basically were waving the white flag at the time. This is coal lobbying over the years, with the last one being 15. They know that their industry, and it's more obviously tied to the price of natural gas, but their industry is on a downturn and they're coming to terms with it. The toughest thing about it being in the diesel market is that you talk about clean diesel, you just stick clean in front of it. There isn't the technologies that we have at our disposal for cleaning up a coal plant, how easy it is to clean up a diesel engine. A diesel engine, that technology, the PM traps and the NOx reduction, the SCR systems are very, very proven. They're not on a coal facility, and the fuel desulfurization and all those other things, very, very difficult. So that's part of the reason why they're waving the white flag. But anyway, I leave you with my last picture that I love so much. It's almost impossible to see, but if you look in between the bridge spans there in the background, the only reason why that town is not suffering is there's a coal-fired power plant right behind that tree. So because the wind's not spinning. Anyway, that is your 45-minute presentation. So where's my trophy? Do I get?
Jim, you get most improved presentation from 45 to 15. Thank you.